Hello, and a very warm welcome to World Stories. I'm Layla Harak with your weekly International Reporters magazine. And in this edition, we head to Australia to celebrate all things Scottish, see how a village in Tajikistan is trying to improve its local environment, and get tips from Bulgaria about how to stop blood-sucking vampires from feasting on us. But first, most tourists will never visit them, but just a short distance away from the magnificent Pyramid of Giza lie sprawling slums stretching as far as the eye can see. Millions of people live in these shanty towns with no running water, no toilets, no sewers, and no electricity. The Arab world's most populous nation has been going through seismic changes since a popular uprising ousted former President Hosni Mubarak 2 years ago. But Egyptians are finding out that it's one thing to topple a regime and another to lift people out of poverty. Today, the divide between the haves and have-nots remains as great as ever. On TV's Mohammed Mouji reports from Cairo on what, if anything, the revolution has brought Egyptians living in the slums.
Approximately half of Cairo's population live in slums. Many of them have moved here from rural areas and had to build their own shelters on the city's periphery. These shanty towns have few or no basic services, such as electricity or wastewater systems.
The sewage is everywhere. It just runs down the slope. No one from the government wants to know. When an official comes by, he doesn't even set foot in the neighborhood. He just stands at the end of the street. It's a disaster. The effluent seeps into everywhere. Look at the ground, it's really soft, but things can get a lot worse. It can make whole houses collapse. And if they ask at all, it's only after a disaster's already happened. Then they say, we should have done this or that. But no, they don't even take a proper look. They always just stand at the end of the street, and from there you can't see what's happening.
Money is extremely tight. The residents here have to buy water for washing. In the absence of water mains, it has to be carried home in containers.
A container costs 10 Egyptian dollars. So each load of washing costs the equivalent of €1.10, leaving us with the equivalent of 20 cents for cooking and eating. We've been living here for 9 years and we're drowning in wastewater. I have to sleep on the ground and I always end up soaked. We can't even sleep for the scorpions and snakes and things. Whenever we go to the authorities, the police chase us off.
Everyone here suffers, but it's worst for families with small children. This is anything but a suitable environment for children. Some parents even give their children away, hoping their quality of life will be a little better elsewhere.
6 families live here. This is my nephew's son. His father's always beating him for playing in the effluent. He doesn't understand. I've even sent my little daughter away. She's just 2 years old, and I was afraid that she'd get hurt by some of the vermin here. The authorities just give us excuses. We had a fire here recently. They told us to get the police. The police wanted papers from us and asked us to get photos of the damage. We did that. But whenever we inquired, they'd say, come back tomorrow. It was always the same. We've been here for 25 years now.
The residents feel completely abandoned. They tried over and over to get the authorities to do something for them. But many have now given up all hope.
Whenever officials come, they just push us aside and ignore us. They don't regard us as humans. Only the inhabitants of the new buildings are humans. We can't even leave the area to go to work. We live here without water, without transportation, with no sewage system, nothing, not even apartments.
A man comes every day to make sure the wastewater doesn't back up.
Everything's wrecked. The doors to the rooms are broken. Water's gotten into the walls. Some of them have collapsed. And 5 times a week, someone has to come to make sure it flows away in the right direction. Some people give him what they can. The vermin stop people from sleeping properly, and walls collapse and kill people.
Many of Cairo's residents can't afford to live in new apartment buildings. While more than 7 million people live in the slums in the megacity, many flats stand empty. The inhuman living conditions have hardly changed since Hosni Mubarak's departure.
Next, Australia's not the first place that you would think of heading in search of all things Scottish. But once a year, a small town in New South Wales turns tartan overnight. And all those looking to celebrate their ties to the motherland gather their clan, dust off their kilts and bust out the bagpipes. And as Christina Pollard reports, you don't have to be Scottish to join in the celebrations.
Mist and the sound of swirling bagpipes. You'd be forgiven for thinking it's another day in the Highlands of Scotland. This is Brigadoon in the New South Wales Southern Highlands, and once a year this sleepy village is transformed into the mythical town of Brigadoon. Clans from far and wide turn the town into the biggest Highland gathering in the Southern Hemisphere. As the story goes, the village of Brigadoon appears for 24 hours once every 100 years before disappearing again into the mists of time. Every April for the past 34 years, thousands of people have made the pilgrimage to Brigadoon to watch the street parade and traditional Highland games and grab a wee slice of Scotland in the process.
We changed the name of the station to Brigadoon, we changed the name of the town to Brigadoon, and Brigadoon overnight becomes Brigadoon. For 12 months we were gone, and then all of a sudden back we come, and we are ready to entertain the public with our version of Brigadoon. But this version is a Scottish Highland gathering.
To set the mood throughout the day for a thoroughly Scottish experience, more than 20 pipe bands march from the village centre to the local sports ground.
This isn't a competition. This is a place for a pipe band to come along and do what they do best: play their pipes and entertain the public.
So no Highland gathering would be complete without the pipes, and the Parramatta RSL contingent is one of many that practice long into the night so that everything is perfect for the big day.
They love playing the pipes, they love getting in the uniform, and the atmosphere down here is fantastic.
Visitors are officially welcomed to Brigadoon by the chieftain of the day.
The role of chieftain is basically to lead the people in celebrating not just Scotland and Scottish tradition, but the community. This is a community gathering.
The event has developed such a tradition that second and third generations of families are now enjoying the Brigadoon experience.
I've been to every Brigadoon, the whole 35. Just love the place, you know, love coming down here and enjoying it. And the atmosphere's great and the music's great. And now I've got all these family pushing me along. I was in charge of the band initially, but my daughter's taken that over, and between her and my son, he's in charge of the drumming, she's in charge of piping, and now I've got 3 grandkids. I'll be back next year, yes. It won't be the same without me.
Brigadoon is all about Highland games for the spectators and the participants, from the traditional to the not so traditional. A highlight is the Brigadoon Stones of Manhood, based on the Magleshan Stones of Manhood from Scotland. This test of strength, speed and agility sees tartan warriors lifting massive sandstone balls.
5 stones, 100 kilograms, up to 165 kilograms. Object: pick up the ball, put the sandstone ball on top of the barrel, and the one who completes all 5 in the quickest time is the winner.
And no Highland gathering would be complete without a haggis burger.
It smells good. I don't know, I'll give it a shot. Yeah, it's pretty good.
I'm just enjoying the whole day. It's quite surreal.
There's Highland dancing, there's bagpipes, there's stalls, there's just nice people, nice food.
You don't have to be Scottish to come here. We welcome everybody. As I said to somebody, get your bum off the beach at Bondi and come to Brigadoon.
Just as magically as it appeared, the day's done, and the mythical Brigadoon slips quietly away for another year.
High up in the premier Alai Mountains of Tajikistan, farmers' livelihoods are at stake. The former Soviet Republic and one of the poorest nations in Central Asia is battling the problem of overgrazing. This is bad for the animals and their owners, but it's also bad for the land. Overgrazing means that the sheep and cows eat the plants right down to their roots, leaving nothing to hold soil in place, and in the process, making their land vulnerable to landslides. Now, the United Nations is trying to change that with the help of one village. UNTV's Luis Patron has more.
After a long and bitterly cold winter, spring arrives in the Pamir Alai Mountains, renewing its pastures. At this time of year, the village women and children are normally busy, tending their animals and taking them to graze in nearby pastures. But not the people around the village of Jurgatol. This year, they are experimenting with a new approach. All their animals are taken to pastures some 12 kilometers away. The herd stays in newly built stables that protect them from the cold spring rain at a time when the newborn lambs are most vulnerable. Here, a small team of herders takes care of the animals in spring. When summer arrives, the herd will travel to graze in distant pastures before returning again in autumn. The construction of the stables was part of a sustainable land management project supported by the UN University, UNU, the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, and the Global Environment Facility. Nevelina Pechova is a researcher from UNU.
In Jurgatol, the key issue has turned out to be access to pastures. Degradation of pastures surrounding the settlement areas has been a key problem.
It was clear to the project team that keeping the animals near the village during springtime had led to overgrazing of the young grasses on the accessible pastures, leaving bare land exposed to erosion by rains and wind.
Construction of stables, which can host livestock earlier in their season outside the villages, is helping to reduce pressure on those surrounding pastures, surrounding the villages.
Local women like Maili Hanyarova embrace this approach as it relieves them from the drudgery of tending their animals.
It's wonderful that the stables were built, and this means we have fewer chores.
Village women now have time to process wool and sew clothes. The work provides an additional source of income and keeps a traditional craft alive.
From ancient times, we have learned how to produce the felt cloth from our great-grandmothers, grandmothers and mothers. I'm now showing the younger generation how to do it so they can learn.
As summer arrives, villagers are leaving to set up camp in the distant summer pastures. This time, Mullah Murad and his neighbors are traveling by truck on a recently improved road.
Things have been changing here, and a lot of people are traveling to the summer pastures. The road is wide, so the villagers can safely transport their belongings without hitting stones.
The improvement of the road, which is also part of the UNU and UNEP project, has enabled people to leave earlier in the season, giving the fields around the village a longer time to regenerate. Herders also welcome the improved safety as the road allows them to reach healthcare facilities more quickly in case of emergencies. While the road brought considerable benefits to the community, it also has had some unintended consequences. It has made it easier for people to come and harvest firewood and take it back in their vehicles. The community took action to remedy the situation.
Although we need to transport coal and other important things, we didn't want to destroy nature. Because the vegetation was disappearing, we decided to limit the length of the road.
That's why the road ends here. It was built only halfway to the summer pastures. From this point on, people must walk and carry their belongings on animals for several hours. Beyond improving their own living conditions, villagers are also committed to safeguard their fragile environment that has sustained their lives for centuries.
It's no exaggeration to say that the award-winning Venezuelan artist Pedro Breno has dedicated most of his 82 years to exploring form and space in his sculptures. Now, an exhibition in Caracas is showcasing his work. The title of the show is Back to the Threshold or Entrance. Carolina Almeidas from TV Vale Venezuela went to talk to him about his work.
Threshold is an essentially spatial concept. A threshold is a transition to another space, a room, a building. Space plays a very important role in this sculpture. When you work with sheet iron, you're dealing with an entirely different sense of space, different than what you'd have with a sculpture in stone or wood, where the mass is pretty much predefined and forms one solid shape. But with a sculpture made of sheet iron, you can integrate the surrounding space and refer to it. You can reach your hand through it, and that creates a real sense of three-dimensional space. I've achieved a kind of harmony between what I build and what I feel. I don't see my work as an essentially scientific work. I let myself be guided by intuition, emotion, and the tension in the material. I think geometrically and abstractly. But, for example, I like to use the plant kingdom as my starting point. I admire the spatial sense of vegetation, the way leaves and trees grow and form a sculpture that can withstand all the storms. And they do it while expanding upward vertically. As that beautiful saying goes, trees die standing up.
And finally, unless you've been living under a rock, you might have noticed that vampires are huge. Courtesy of Hollywood, these heartthrobs with fangs have legions of teenage girls pining for blood-sucking romance. But in Bulgaria, vampires are still of the traditional type, terrifying, nightmarish creatures that drain the life out of their victims. Well, now Bulgarian anthropologists are in a rush to record all the trusty vampire-slaying methods for future generations. Nova TV filed this report.
As folklore would have it, humans turn into vampires if they're unlucky enough to be bitten by one of the undead. But some folk stories say that only cruel people become vampires. For 20 years now, anthropologist Sashka Bisaranova has been researching rituals and traditions in northern Bulgaria's Vidim region. Vampires are at the heart of some of them.
According to popular belief, people who die of unnatural causes, who die when they are very young or very old, can become vampires. This relates to a need for life to have defined boundaries. It's unnatural for a young person to die, but becoming too old can also result in your becoming a vampire. There's also an old belief that this trait can be inherited. We came across a case like that in the village of Gradets, where there is a family whose name is Ghoul.
It was believed that evil people rose from their graves to inflict harm on other individuals, or frequently an entire village.
They might have heard something clattering on the roofs, appearing at night, causing trouble. Sometimes animals died, or people got the feeling that they were suffocating.
Folklore says that a man can become a vampire if he has never been injured in his life.
An old woman told us about a case like that in the village of Gheorghic. It related to her grandfather, who they thought had become a vampire. Every night, a domestic animal died. Then the mayor of the village allowed the grave to be exhumed. This happened at the beginning of the 20th century, in 1902. The body of the dead man hadn't started to decompose. The cheeks of the departed were pink, his nails and hair had grown, and his body was lying on one side in the coffin. They hammered a spike through the body and poured boiling wine over it. This was the way they stopped the vampire's activities and put an end to the damage he was doing.
Boyanka Marinova is one of the few remaining people who still observe the tradition of ensuring that the dead don't turn into vampires.
We put bulbs of garlic inside the coffin, and then we put candles in the corners. We use the last candle to make a cross over the dead man. 3 women used to go and put flax on the departed's body. But we don't do it these days, because we cannot find any. So we use paper instead.
What do you do with the spindle?
We insert the spindle in 3 different places, with the sharp end downwards. 1 spindle for each bulb of garlic.
And that will stop him becoming a vampire?
Yes, our grandmothers believed that, so we believe too.
In some villages in this region, a nail is hammered into people's doorsteps. They believe that it will ward off the danger of them becoming a vampire.
Nowadays, with the resurgence of vampire movies, vampires have become part of youth culture again. But popular beliefs about hunting them are slowly disappearing as time goes on.
Things are changing more and more. People are forgetting these beliefs. The generation that grew up before World War II and know and preserve these traditions will pass away.
And that's all we've got time for this week. Thanks so much for joining us. Remember, you can watch this show or any past show by heading to dw.de/worldstories. I'll leave you now with this week's Fix of the World. See you next time.